Hello, this is CHistrue, and I've resurrected the Stefan Molyneux issue yet again, back from the dead. Keep claiming I'm going to drop it, but I haven't, and I'm going to discuss his recent views on religion and the fact that he, being an atheist, has decided to acknowledge religion as a force in society and as something that can't simply be ignored. There's, by the way, a precedent for that. The founding fathers of the country were often deists. A lot of them even went so far as to embrace some degree, at least, of European-style free-thinking, although a little more reserved than the French. And yet they understood that this was predominantly a Christian country and that Christian ideas were going to infuse the culture, and in a lot of ways, like Molyneux, understood that Christianity is a force to be reckoned with. Now, I've been very critical of Stefan Molyneux's views, particularly his, I'd say, rather extreme forms of conservatism. But this is going to be a little bit more nuanced, and I'm going to have to really go in depth with this one, because it's not a simple yes or no issue. I myself would consider myself some mixture of liberal Judaism, deism, and pantheism. In a lot of ways similar to the founders of the country, who had a mixture of liberal Protestantism, deism, and pantheism. Okay, so we have two out of the three being similar. I have made a number of videos in which I myself have taken issue with extreme forms of philosophical naturalism, mechanistic philosophy, reductionism. I have defended I don't know if this video is going to come out well. It looks like it's freezing, but I'll try. I have defended myself the idea that the spiritual has a reality. I've discussed mathematics and metaphysics, which, by the way, I'm going to get back to in this channel if I continue it. So if I continue the channel, it's going to be back to set theory. And I'm also going to be making a lot of other videos private to make room for it. So if you want to watch them now. And I mean it this time. So I may or may not continue with the channel after this, but if I do, it's going to be... I'll have to do a part 2 with this one, I can already tell. But if I do, it will be back to math. So enjoy the forays into other stuff while you can. I have a little note here to help me to collect my thoughts, because, again, this is not going to be very, very easy. So I have a little list of things I'm going to try to get to. But Stefan essentially is saying that Christianity or religion may in fact be more compatible with his notion of a free market, quote-unquote, society than atheism, which in his mind tends to replace the state with God, or God with the state. I think that, again, it's a very complicated, convoluted subject, because what he's talking about is a particular time and a particular place and a particular theology. He's not talking about the history of even the majority of Western Christianity. It wasn't but a few hundred years ago that kings were considered to be divinely anointed. It wasn't but even a few decades ago that authority figures like police officers, teachers, people whom Stefan would disparage as being agents of the state were seen as having been given their power by God. The older kind of conservative, the kind of conservative that would be let's say pre-late 20th century, tended to have and I don't necessarily mean this to be disparaging, but a kind of authoritarian traditionalist mindset. It was authoritarian, not totalitarian. It wasn't necessarily, he didn't believe in the absolute state, and I say he, because that's the pronoun that probably I'm referring to, but he believed in law and order. And he didn't necessarily hold republicanism or democracy or libertarianism or these ideas as being the highest good. So the particular kind of Protestant Christianity to which Stefan is referring to has a very definite origin in American society. And I would say, to be honest, it only goes back a few hundred years at most, and a lot of its doctrines and theologies probably would conflict with the Old and New Testaments on some levels. All right, I've already departed a little bit from this list here, so let me get to some points I wanted to cover. I wanted to talk about religion and obedience to capitalist regimentation. The older kind of conservative religion that upheld the capitalist market system was decidedly non-libertarian. It was very much of the idea of about how to have workers go to work, and as they went to work, they would obey the boss. There was no pretense of a fixation on personal liberty. Now, it may also be that Stefan himself is moving away from that a little bit with his embrace of Donald Trump and some of his, at least overlooking some of his more authoritarian tendencies. I don't know. Again, I haven't watched his channel quite as much as I used to, so it's possible I'm wrong. But the really, as I understand it, from my reading of Christian theology, which from a non-Christian, by the way, it's still pretty extensive. I've read pretty extensively in Christian theology. The older form of Protestant Christianity, even going back to Martin Luther, was decidedly non-libertarian, non-socialist, yes, but also non-libertarian, non-democratic, and very much Luther himself held Romans 13 to be very high regard. He believed in obedience took precedence over liberty. And yes, indeed, that has been a bulwark in our capitalist system, but not quite in the way that Stefan imagines. Now, it seems like I'm being very critical of his position, but I want to make a point of stating that my opinion is mixed. And the reason my opinion is mixed is because you cannot look at the history of progressive thought in Western civilization and not acknowledge Christian influence. Looking to the English Revolution, various peasant revolutions, there were slogans like "No King but King Jesus," and these were millenarians, a lot of whom were socialists, pre-Marxist socialists, and they believed that existing evils were going to be swept away by the millennium. You can't look at the history of reform movements, abolitionism, abolishing child labor, without also looking to the fact that there was some mixture of the Christian and the socialist in their ideology, or ideologies, I should say. What makes it even more complicated and complex is our own history, and Stefan, even though he's Canadian, seems to focus a lot on our politics here. He's kind of taken no taxation without representation to mean he doesn't want to be taxed, but he wants to interfere in our politics. But okay. All right, maybe I'll do a video interfering with Canada's politics someday. But the split in American Christianity between liberal Christianity, which goes back to maybe the first and second Great Awakenings, the idea of social reform, even though they were fundamentalists, they believed strongly in the Bible. They also believed in social reform, that the millennium didn't have to wait. They often worked hand in glove with abolitionists. It wasn't until the 1920s that Christianity became very solidly what we might call conservative. It became solidly fundamentalist Christianity became a lot more right-wing than it had been in the time of the 19th century or the 18th century. During the 18th and 19th century, you had a lot of Christian socialists. You had a lot of Christians who were in favor of separating from England, okay, just the same as deists and free thinkers were. You had Christians who were in favor of reform. You had Christians who believed they were building the kingdom of God not just by abolishing alcoholism and the consumption of alcohol, but also by treating people better in society. So there's a very honorable history here. But there are also, again, complexities. And so in part 2 of this video, I'm going to get into Thomas Reid, common sense, and maybe the roots of some of the anti-philosophical tendencies within American Christendom. And I hope you'll stick around for that. And I hope that you'll continue with this video series to see where I'm going with this. Because as I say, after this, it's kind of back to analytic philosophy and set theory. And I mean it this time. So enjoy this last little foray into other subjects while you can.